Next, I'd like to recognize Mr. Roy.
Thank the chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I'd like to note that I'm glad that my friend from Maryland, who I don't see on the screen anymore, is committed to attacking judicial activism as much as I like to do, and is now quoting my constitutionalist friend and Fifth Circuit Judge Don Willett, whose daughter is a classmate of my son's in school in Austin, Texas. He's a good friend. But notably not being cited right now by my Democratic colleagues is my friend and great American devoted to the Constitution, Justice Clarence Thomas, who said in his concurrence in Ziegler, quote, "I write separately to note my growing concern with our qualified immunity jurisprudence. Until we shift the focus of our inquiry to whether immunity existed at common law, we will continue to substitute our own policy preferences for the mandates of Congress. In an appropriate case, we should reconsider our qualified immunity jurisprudence." Well, I'm glad we're all agreeing with Clarence Thomas today. The problem is that, as my friend from California, Mr. McClintock, suggested, is that my Democratic colleagues are, one, targeting almost entirely and solely police officers, and that is entirely political, and two, intertwining that attack with a coordinated defunding effort, notwithstanding my friend from Maryland's characterization to the contrary. Failing to acknowledge, for example, the $150 million cut in Austin, Texas, the $22 million in Baltimore, Maryland, the $16 million in Boston, Massachusetts, the $1 million in Burlington, Vermont, the $10 million in Denver, Colorado, $2 million in Hartford, Connecticut, Kansas City, $42 million, LA, $150 million. Of course, notably, most of these jurisdictions the following year refunded those cuts because they saw the foolishness of the knee-jerk reaction that destroyed and devastated our police officers' and ability to do their jobs across the country. But Austin puts money back in their budget, and guess what? The police academies are completely destroyed. And now you got to go back and try to figure out how to recruit. And now you don't have people being able to answer 911 calls. Now, my Democratic colleagues want to talk about qualified immunity. But then they say, oh, you voted against $350 billion of funding. They don't tell you that that was in a $1.9 trillion monstrosity filled with all sorts of other socialist big government garbage. They don't tell you that the $350 billion has language in there saying that it's about community investing. Not just money for cops to be able to go do their job, but community investing. And I heard the chairman of the Judiciary Committee talk about, oh, I was fine with moving money from the cops to some other department. Well, of course. If you can take that money and take it away from cops and go dump it into some social engineering program in New York City. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. Instead of being able to sit here and say, let's actually have a discussion about qualified immunity. Last summer, my colleagues forced a vote and didn't give us the chance to amend on the floor or have a debate on actual qualified immunity, instead of just gutting it, targeting cops. I actually think we're having a productive conversation here with respect to what Judge Newman has produced and put forward, and I think my friend from California said positive things about, and I think that Mr. Schweikert from Cato has said. So I would just like to kind of throw out there in my last 2 minutes, and I'd like to throw a question to Judge Newman. Do you believe, sir, Judge Newman, that if you were to go down the road you suggested, you're talking about applying that across the board, not just to police departments, right? That would try to address the qualified immunity problem for government officials of all stripes.
Yes, just like 1983 says, whenever somebody acting under color of law violates, it denies the constitutional rights of a person, any person under color of law. It could be a jailer. It's certainly not limited to police officers.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And then if I might direct a question to Mr. Manguel and to Mr. Johnson, how would you gentlemen view the possibility of going down the road of what Judge Newman puts out there, that we have liability for the cities, for the departments, et cetera, as opposed to targeting the individuals, and then let that get sorted out between the individuals and the cities, the sovereigns, if you will?
I certainly think that's a proposal that's worthy of close consideration. And I would note that it mirrors exactly what happens right now. As I said earlier in my testimony, 99.98% of all dollars recovered against individual police officers are actually paid by the governmental entity that employs them. That's already the case. So yeah, I do think it's certainly worth considering. What I would add to that, though, is addressing the problem of saucier and its reversal. I think allowing courts to continually punt constitutional questions leaves the law underdeveloped in the civil rights arena and reinstituting that proper sequence, I think, will go a long way.
Well, thank you. I got 15 seconds left. I think Mr. Johnson answered Mr. McClintock's question on that. I would just note that this idea of making sure this applies beyond police officers is critically important. I'll point out a case in Colorado Springs where a caseworker for the El Paso County Department of Human Services received permission from her supervisor to inspect a 4-year-old girl's buttocks, stomach, and back for signs of physical abuse, did so, took pictures without approval from the parents. The parents had no recourse. We need to address this across the board. Mr. Chairman, over my time, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Roy.